especially what on earth David Lammy is doing to 700 years of democracy and justice by basically digging in and saying, yeah, we're going to scrap the jury service. That's fine. Gone for crimes with sentences of less than 3 years. Well, hold on. I mean, doesn't the jury help determine whether a sentence is going to end up as less than 3 years? But also, what sort of crimes are these that no longer, that are just being heard by one particular judge who's going to go, right, that's it. It is my interpretation of the law alone. Because that is the point, right, in spreading the burden, is making sure that you've got a range of people who will all bring with them their own inherent prejudices, because we all have them. And so by having 12 peers making up the jury, you sort of assume that these people from different walks of life have had different life experiences, will bring with them different political viewpoints, different emotional baggage, and that way, hopefully, all the various sorts of potential prejudice is cancelled out. But no. Meanwhile, good old Lord Hermer. The man we love to hate, the Attorney General, the first unelected Attorney General in history, the king of the leftist lawyers. Oh, he's banging the drum that Nigel Farage needs to apologise over alleged racism and anti-Semitism. Once again, there you go. It is a judge who thinks that you can make your decision about someone and then gather the evidence to support your preconditions. That isn't how it works. We're going to be discussing that and yet another ridiculous story about a migrant who has escaped deportation. I'll be letting you know the reason why. Joining us first, top of the show, is the brilliant Babber-in-Chief, Mr. James Price, former government special advisor. Hello there, my love.
How are you, my friend? You well?
I'm very well. I just have come back from the Shire. In fact, I'm going to be pinging in and out all week this week. And I was at an event last night, and I was just surrounded by all the good folk of our county and how beautiful it was as well. It sort of makes you feel like your energy is restored somehow, being around sensible people and not being in London.
When you say going to an event, you meant you went down the pub, yeah?
I didn't go to the pub. I was at another event, which I will keep to myself as to what it was. But I thoroughly enjoyed being around 150 good folk of the Shire from all the various corners of the Shire. It was a real delight. Now, something that isn't a delight is Blimming David Lammy, because I don't know if you heard earlier when I was doing the handover, as we like to call it, with Ian Collins, but I read a slam dunk point by Tom Slater on Twitter. X, as it's now supposed to be called, which basically said, could you imagine a Conservative government or a Reform government chucking people in prison for, tweets and then basically saying we're going to get rid of the jury service? People would be going out of their minds saying this is the proof they're fascists, they're dictators, it is a tyrannical regime, oh my goodness. And yet, when Blimming David Lammy turns up to do it, it's like, oh yeah, that's it, done now, that's happening. It's like, what?
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I actually want to quote, I've got the exact quote here, I think, a very wise jurisprudential scholar who once said, jury trials are a fundamental part of our democratic settlement. Criminal trials without juries are a bad idea. Now, which great legal jurist, which great philosopher do you think that was? That's right, it was David Lammy himself 5 years ago. I mean, it's extraordinary. This guy is so stupid, so inept, so ghastly. He's going against something he said only a few years ago. And as you say, Alex, if it had been the Tories, if it had been evil Mr. Farage, he would be calling us fascists. If he's saying how terrible it was, he would be pointing out that the first thing that the Bolsheviks did in 1917 was abolish jury trials. The first thing the Nazis did in the 30s, jury trials. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, jury trials. Franco, jury trials, got rid of that straight away. Salazar, the CCP in China, obviously got rid of them straight away. Time and time again, it is the first act of some kind of totalitarian dictatorship to get rid of it. And if it had been, as you say, the Tories or Reform, and by the way, doing it on these horrendous grounds of, it will save a couple of quid, he would be the first person marching and preaching and screeching and shouting. But for some mad reason, he's decided that he's going to shred the last of his dignity, frankly, on scrapping an ancient liberty of ours. And one last thing, Alex, I'm going to disagree with you slightly. You said just now, it's a 700-year-old tradition. I think it goes back way further than this. You know, the Ethelred the Unready had this going for us in the 900s, and I worked out that Aeschylus wrote a play called the Eumenides, where Athena comes down on high to the people of Athens and gives them the glory and joy of the jury trials about 2,480 odd years ago. That's how long this has been a staple part of Western civilization. But David Lammy thinks he's the person to get rid of it. It's beyond a joke.
Someone's just messaged, and this is, I'm going to read it out because this has triggered a thought process in my mind concurrently while listening to your great knowledge of ancient civilizations and the classics. Shauna's message saying, unusually, I find myself disagreeing with everyone on the jury issue. I've recently seen a couple of televised shows where there have been two jurors to judge on what was originally real cases. The jurors did not know of the existence of the other jury. The juries came back with different verdicts despite hearing the same evidence. One factor was how a dominant person in the jury could influence others in the jury. Another factor was where members of the jury formed little cliques. Sometimes the evidence is too complicated and the ability of some jury members to understand the evidence was challenging for them. Hence, I think we should have professional jurors. Well, actually, that's sort of suggesting jurors should still be the case, not one person. But what this has made me think here, and I'm just going to reach into my handbag and get out my tinfoil hat, isn't it funny, how all of a sudden certain programmes are being put on Channel 4 to discredit the concept of juries, and then just in the wake of that, the Labour Party get rid of juries? I don't know, maybe there's no connection, but it is, sometimes I find it interesting how certain concepts are fed into the public psyche well in advance of someone going, I know, let's make some legislation on this. So I do wonder whether, don't know, there's been a sort of movement to get rid of juries for a long time now.
There has. Well, maybe the terrifying thing is that David Lammy is watching whatever these programs are and getting his policy ideas off the telly in the same way that Keir Starmer wanted everybody to watch that ghastly program Adolescence, based on something that never actually happened.
It was a psyop.
Well, and let's remember that actually in the New Labour years early on, Jack Straw tried to get rid of juries. So at least the socialists have been trying to do this for, almost 30 years now. Look, jury trials are not perfect, and it will be the case that guilty people will quite possibly go free as a result of it, and that's not a wonderful thing. It would hopefully mean that the prosecution and the Crown Prosecution Service and all these wonderful smart egghead barristers with their wigs on will try harder and do better, but it is a protection of our ancient liberties. And there are some other problems with it. So Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore, did away with jury trials in his 30-year reign over Singapore because he found that all the different ethnic groups in Singapore all tended to vote in favour of their own groups. So the kind of Malay would vote for the Malay and the Han Chinese for the Han Chinese. So he got rid of it because he couldn't make it work in a multi-ethnic society. I would like for that not to be the case in Britain, for us all to put those sorts of things aside and to have a sense of national and civic identity that goes beyond that. And one of the ways that I hope, maybe I'm just being naive at this point, that you can do that is by forcing everybody to have these sorts of responsibilities to their country and to their fellow man, like serving in juries. And it's one of the only areas, maybe the only area I can think of, where we compel people in this society now, in this country, to go and do things they don't choose to do. It's not a voluntary thing to sit on a jury. It's voluntary even to go and vote, but not to sit on a jury. And I think it's really important that we have areas like that in civic life. Maybe there should be more of them, that we make people give up some of their time to serve their country and their communities and their fellow man. David Lammy doesn't care about that. He just wants to get rid of all of it.
Well, we're losing our Ryan next week because he's been called up, so I don't know who's going to be producing this programme. It's going to go to the
Southwark Crown Court is just around the corner, I think. So if it's Southwark Crown Court, he can pop in and
I'm not sure how, if we're allowed to talk about it. I'm not sure what the rules around it are, whether he's allowed to say that he's doing it and where it is. But either way, that we are losing a key member of staff to such servitude. Let's talk. I mean, actually, before we move on to the next topic, talking about juries, it's interesting, actually, because countries do this differently. And I was thinking then about the American system, like the trial of O.J. Simpson, when people actually try and stack the jury deliberately, going like, right, if we get some people from this neighbourhood, and if it's a predominantly, jury of this sort of particular creed or colour, then they're going to work in our favour. I mean, thank goodness we actually don't have that in the United Kingdom.
No, although, do you know, we actually used to have it for a long time. You were able to object to people in juries, and that was whittled away over the last sort of century or so, until I think the 1970s or so, where there was a case where they tried to stack the jury because there was an ethnic element involved. And so that has gone by the wayside now, which is all the more reason, by the way, that we should try and minimize the differences between people like this, which is the exact opposite, of course, of what wokeism does. We want people just to feel that they're British no matter what, and that the reason that Lady Justice herself is always depicted as having a blindfold on is because that stuff is supposed to not matter at all, and yet we do the complete opposite. And you even had, let's remember, this Labour government very recently had to, and bless Shabana Mahmood for coming to try and stop this, but there were proposals that were going to be the case that if you were from an ethnic minority, you would be treated less harshly if you'd committed crimes. And thank goodness that was quashed by this awful little quango called the Sentencing Council that's probably been responsible for a huge number of crimes happening, because it has watered down the level of sentences, or the lifespan of sentences that people have been under. So basically, I think the message here is that yes, the justice system is a total mess. David Lammy is not the answer to that, in the same way that he is not the answer to very much.
Is there a question to which David Lammy is the answer? Answers on a postcard, please. Talking about David Lammy and the brilliance of his mind and the effectiveness of his governance. Let's talk about the fact that, guess what? 12 more prisoners have been accidentally released in the past 3 weeks, 2 of whom are still at large. I mean, this is entirely down to the ridiculous proposition from the government that rather than go, right, we need to pull out our finger and somehow make a prison out of midair and do it stat. They're like, oh, we're just going to have to release people early. And guess what? Typically, all of our public institutions are sort of bureaucratic and failing, and so they're making massive errors.
Yeah, I'm not exactly shocked by this. It is shocking, and we should be more upset about these things. The bit that really gets me is, you say, it can't be that difficult in terms of the raw atoms of physics to be able to build a building with some locks on some doors, right? We live in a society now where Elon Musk, I've said this before, Elon Musk can catch 40-story high skyscraper-sized spaceships out of the air with robot arms, and you've got all these other boffins making sand think in terms of all this AI. Yeah. And yet we're saying it's impossible to build some buildings with some locks on some doors. I mean, come on. Surely Britain is the 5th biggest economy in the world, a nuclear arm-powered state with some of the smartest, most dedicated public servants and citizens in the world. We are not too incapable of building some prisons.
I know, exactly. I mean, they could have not increased the welfare cap, child welfare benefit, could have not lifted that and instead put all of that money into making some super prisons. I mean, every time I see those massive storage units, they're everywhere now. Do you know what I mean? Yellow box company, whatever they're called, Safe Store. They're everywhere. Everyone's got stuff in storage. These things are vast. They're like cavernous. They have various subterranean layers that seem to stretch on ad infinitum. And you just think, if they can knock those out in about a year's time in an industrial estate, the Labour Party could do the same. I totally agree. Now, let's flip back to this story before we talk about Lord Hermer. I can't wait. But the reason why we really do not need to have people who, presiding single-handedly over our judicial system, is because they tend to come up with some terrible, terrible judgments, such as an asylum seeker aged 20 fled his home country after sleeping with his brother's wife for 9 months while they were all living in the same family home. So therefore, he cannot be deported back to the country, because if he is, his crime would incur a punishment of 100 lashes of a whip, or potentially a death sentence. So now we've got some random Iranian here because he was shacking up with his brother's wife.
Well, I mean, to quote the good book, Am I My Brother's Keeper? I just think look, there are sob stories around the world everywhere. There are bad things that happen. And look, there are lots of countries, I would say every country, almost every country, that is not as nice and wonderful and peaceful and safe as the United Kingdom. And if they adopted the kind of policies that the United Kingdom used to adopt, then they would be nicer places. We could become richer, they could become safer. We are neither of those things right now, so we should perhaps get back to doing some of those things. But we can't take every case, even the most deserving cases in the world, and yet we seem to be acting as if we're not the sadly quite poor country that we are today, and taking in all of these cases. If we were going to take people in, if we still think that despite us being poor and less safe than we used to be, again that we should be taking people in. I'm not sure that, not quite a bigamist, but a serial philanderer Iranian bloke is the most sympathetic character that I would be devoting taxpayer resources to. What about all the children stuck in miserable refugee camps in the most benighted parts of the world? What about people in Britain who've paid in their whole lives and are going to be freezing in their homes over this winter because Ed Miliband doesn't care about making energy cheaper for them? Maybe we should think about those people before the top Iranian shagger comes and gets protection.
Now, let's talk now about the man I love to hate, Lord Hermer, our Attorney General. My understanding is he's the first appointee to that role who wasn't democratically elected. It was just plucked out of, well, obscurity to the rest of the world, but great familiarity to Sir Keir Starmer from his old chambers, the ever left-wing Fabian Society-connected matrix chambers. And essentially been put in charge of. Normally what happens is the government says, right, this is the policy we want. And then the Attorney General goes, right, this is how legally I think you can do it. But I always get the impression with Hermer that he goes, right, legally, this is what you've got to do. And Starmer goes, yes, sir, OK, yes, I promise, international law, I'm a big puppet. And this man, this sort of dark, shadowy character, is now, trying to drive the knife into Nigel Farage by saying that he must apologise over racism and anti-Semitism that may or may not have happened, that to me doesn't seem to have any evidential basis apart from a couple of people moaning, that you think, if what they said is true, then OK, it's ugly. Some of the things he may have said are ugly. But I don't know whether I can believe these people are not being politically motivated, because they do seem to fit a certain type. And given that this is something, 5 decades ago, we all did things when we were young that we wouldn't be so proud of if they emerged right now. Or if we did them as an adult, people would, their eyebrows would rightfully shoot up to their hairline. And yet this is what they're going for. Hermer's going for this stuff. They keep pushing and pushing and pushing. They can't leave it alone. I just think it's disgraceful. I think it's almost a form of bullying.
Yeah, it's very peculiar, isn't it? It's a kind of archaeology offence, or offence archaeology. The version of this used to be going through Twitter and seeing things that people had liked years ago, or things that they'd said, and go, oh, well, this is clearly the most terrible person in the world because he once liked a tweet that said something a bit saucy or whatever. This is even more attenuated out, that people recollecting, as you say, almost 50 years ago, what it was that a child would say. Again, I'm sure that all sorts of mad, bad and ugly things are said in playgrounds, and that a young Nigel Farage at his, quite nice posh school probably isn't the most sympathetic character in the world, but I can't imagine that there are many teenagers or children who haven't said and done stupid things. Yeah. And regardless, I don't understand why it is that the Attorney General of this country, who is now taking a break from hurriedly giving away British sovereign territory, which is the main thing that Hermer has done in his time in the form of the Chagos Islands, is stymieing the ability for us to stop the small boats invading this country full of fighting-age men coming over, is stopping the ability of us building any infrastructure, and stopping all of these other progressive things that we could do to make the country a better place, an easier place to live, a safer place, that he's going after another leader of a political party and saying he has to apologise for stuff he did when he was a child. Are we supposed to believe that Richard Herman was a perfect child? How can he prove that to us?
We're talking about things that were taking place in, what, the 1960s, 1970s? I don't know. But when you look at all sorts of things taking place around that time, not all of it looks so pretty now. Look back at some of the old James Bond films. You're like, whoa, you can't say that. But even things that, I remember saying in the playground in the 90s, at the end of the day, you wouldn't say now. I remember when I was growing up, the sort of main accusation if you didn't like something, it's like, oh my God, that is so gay. Oh, you're so gay. Like, you wouldn't do that now. People would be like, you can't, that's just really offensive. But people said it all the time back then. So, imagine if I became Prime Minister in 10 years' time, some sort of leftist could pop up and say to the Guardian, oh God, I remember Alex Phillips used to say that things were gay that she didn't like. And I'm like, everyone did, It's like, that's what everyone said. Anyway, I just find it's all confected. It's all nasty, intimidating. It's playing the man, not the ball. And I just can't wait for that man Hermer to have his comeuppance. James.
particularly weird thing that the left seems to be trying to always muddy the waters around people's ages. So you're having a go at Nigel Farage now for something he did when he was supposed to have been a child, and yet when other people who are children of the same age commit the most hideous and heinous crimes imaginable, suddenly, oh well, no, they're a child. You can't do anything mean to them. And then you've got, oh well, they're allowed to vote, but we're going to change the age at which they can ever smoke or drink. And
but they can't have a vape. But if they want to, you know, slice off their genitals, be my guest. James, I've got to let you go, my darling, because I'd love to fill the entire 3 hours with you, but we've got other people to speak to. The wonderful, brilliant James Price there. We're going to take a